Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our monthly call that provides an update on the digital framework and digital government efforts across the BC government. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to have you all joining us today. And we have a really exciting session for you planned. It's been a little while since we did our last session like this. The last time that we got together as a group was at the end of August, and we did something a little bit different. We spent an hour brainstorming around the future of digital government. And so now with the fall session back in full swing, we're sort of back into the groove that we had before, trying to provide monthly updates and really encouraging lots of ambition and progress on digital government across the BC Public Service. For today's call, I'm going to provide the regular update on things that have been progressing on the digital framework, and then we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on data. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of data in the BC government, where we're at now, and I've got two very special guests joining me today that I'll introduce in more depth in a moment, but Alex Ritchie and Geneviève Lambert are here joining us for the conversation. I'll start with a little bit of an update. So in terms of things that have been progressing in the last couple of months since our last call on digital government, there has been quite a bit of progress, and I would say certainly from within the OCIO, a bit of soul searching. For those of you who are perhaps new to these calls, just a quick reminder of what we mean when we talk about digital government. Generally, we're talking about public sector efforts to really embrace modern technology, as well as the culture and practices that come with the internet age, and using those things to provide great services to people. And hopefully over time, being so good at providing these services that we earn the trust of British Columbians. This is something that we're seeing gain increasing traction around the world and across the BC government. So I know that for those of you who have been joining on a monthly basis, you've heard lots of wonderful case studies. You've heard about robotic process automation over in SDPR. You've heard about some fairly fascinating work around DevOps and agile delivery in the natural resources sector. So really wonderful case studies from across government. We've now had the digital framework in place for over a year. And for those of you who are perhaps less familiar with it, it's built on four priority pillars that are services to citizens, data and information, being digital inside, and being connected outside. If we go to slide 5, there are a few sort of major updates outside of those pillars that have on things that have moved forward. And so we've seen lots of progress against the framework, and we've measured that through our progress report, which will be coming out shortly. We've started some engagement across government around lessons learned and priorities for the path forward. And we've had a lot of progress on related efforts. So some of our colleagues here within the OCIO have been engaging ministry partners across government to take a sober second look at our operating model for IMIT for digital service delivery, as well as the way that we provide shared services across government in the IT space. If we go to slide 6, this is a bit of a sneak peek of what we did for the progress report. Essentially, we went through the 4 pillars that we had identified in the alpha of the digital framework, and we looked at all the commitments that we had made. There were 17 of them, and we worked with teams to measure progress against those initial commitments. And good news, government has made substantial progress on all of them. Some of them had quite a bit more progress than others, but we have been able to move them all forward. And we've drafted a progress report that reflects the progress against these 17 commitments. It also includes a bit of analysis around the things that we learned as we work to deliver on these 17 commitments. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that some of the highlights were a real need to be very rigorous in focusing on outcomes. It's far too easy, it seems, to get caught up in procedural commitments and saying, we're taking steps towards things. But we found that those commitments that came with clear indicators of success were generally made some more progress. We also found that it's important to measure progress along the way. to align our commitments and our priorities with demand for services. So, really ensuring that things like common components are being strengthened on the basis of demand from digital delivery teams across government. We also saw a lot of value in terms of strengthening governance and really focusing on teams, focusing on results and user experience, but really supporting those delivery teams across government. And then we also had some lessons learned around building awareness and continuing to invest in learning. As part of the process for drafting this report, as well as to look at opportunities for the path forward, we did lead a number of engagement sessions across government. And thank you to so many of you on this call that contributed to that engagement. We had over 160 participants from across government participate in those sessions, and we had lots of wonderful ideas. So we cataloged 450 ideas of things that we could be doing going forward. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see we have gone through all of those ideas and categorized them along the pillars that we have in the alpha, and we are looking very carefully at what we can commit to going forward on a government-wide basis. An initial sort of overview of the sorts of things that we heard, what teams are looking for on a go-forward basis when it comes to support for digital government. If you go to the next slide, we have categorized those to some extent. One of the key themes was people love working in agile ways. We saw that there is growing traction for agile strategies, but we can do more to strengthen those approaches, train folks up, and really champion great delivery. There is lots of interest from teams around increasing collaboration and communications. So looking to do things like share resources, make open source code more easily discoverable, have more engagement across government. We had some folks who were really looking at the opportunity to strengthen our culture and embracing a digital first culture that really does serve some of our higher priorities. Great foreshadowing for the session today. There was a lot of interest around data and working to more effectively steward data, create it and share it more consistently in alignment with data standards. Seems like everybody loves DevOps, so that's great, and it's kind of a nice indication of some of the work that has been coming out of the lab. There was quite a bit of feedback around the opportunities to improve funding and governance, making it easier to navigate the funding process and ensuring that governance does align with our sort of higher goals. Lots of input around learning and HR, making it easier to access the talent that we need and address knowledge gaps. There was also quite a bit of discussion around product needs, so making it easier for teams to access the tools that they need. There was interest in stronger supports and a greater ability for ministries to navigate OCIO services. And there was a real emphasis on continuing to double down on user needs. So lots of great input and progress there. I'll go through the other updates very quickly. So these are the ones that I provide updates on every month. So next slide, on funding, we've continued to make lots of progress around modernizing the way that technology is funded. Good news, we have our new digital support team in place. A couple of team members joined a little while back. We now have the full team in place. This is a team that's essentially looking at opportunities to deliver greater value through our investments in digital government. We've also rolled out a new template for the Digital Investment Board. So if you go to the next slide, this template is available for anybody who wants to take a look at it on the IMIT Capital envelope on our IntraWeb presence. We can share a link in the chat. And you'll see that the focus there is really going to be on results, teams, UX, a lot of the things that we talk about regularly is aligning with best practices in digital government. Slide 12, you see we've made some good progress around digital and data priorities. And so that will continue to advance, and you'll hear more after the interregnum period. Next slide. Great progress on modern tools, and I'm sure that you can pepper Jen with more questions through the Slido chat if you're interested in hearing more around cloud compute and storage. That there has been lots of progress on the hosting and application development framework, including a fairly detailed application portfolio summary. And the last update is around platform tools. So I'm delighted to hear that everybody was keen on DevOps because there's been some good progress there. And there is going to be a major milestone around the OpenShift DevOps platform on October 14th. So well done to everybody who's been continuing to drive all this progress forward. And it's certainly exciting to see this level of traction. Okay, so now we've just blasted through some updates, and now we're going to have a little bit of fun and have a conversation. So let's pull this presentation down, and I'd like to introduce our two speakers. So we've got Jen Lambert and Alex Ritchie. So can I start by asking you each to introduce yourselves? Jen, you've got a long track record of working on data. What's your background? Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Well, currently I'm leading the Cloud Pathfinder team. Is anybody else hearing an echo?
No.
Alex is.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Oh, now I hear an echo.
Okay. And was the ED for the Data Systems and Services team. So that included the DataBC group and the Data Innovation Program. That Data Innovation Program was developed based on a kind of vague mandate to improve data sharing in government, and it's grown to support quite a few data analysis teams in government to work on some great data-informed policy work. So very excited that was able to come to fruition. And I'm also happy to be working on cloud now. We previously tried to get cloud for the Data Innovation Program, and that was quite challenging. So I am currently working on Cloud Pathfinder to support my former self in reaching our objective that we had at the time.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And Alex, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. So I'm Alex Ritchie. I'm currently leading the branch of Data Systems and Services within the OCIO. That branch, as Jen referred to there, delivers the DataBC program and the Data Innovation Program. My history in data in the BC government, I actually started as a GIS analyst co-op and took on a whole bunch of different roles mainly in the information management branch at the Ministry of Transportation before joining the group that I'm a part of now. So I was actually a long-term client of the DataBC program, and then now have the pleasure of leading that crew of folks that deliver it. So having a lot of fun.
So, okay, wonderful. So we obviously have two people who have a very deep understanding of data in the BC government, and data as a powerful enabler for digital government. I think really suggests that it's worth doing a bit of a deep dive. So let's dig right in. Alex, I'm going to start with you. What is the current state of play for data in the BC government? You know, we've heard about Data BC, we've heard about the Data Innovation Program. How much data do we have in the BC government? How are we doing?
Sure. Thanks for that, Jamie. So, I mean, I would start with everything that we do as public servants involves generating useful data and using that useful data to provide services to citizens. Everything from installing traffic sensors, holding town halls, taking service requests from citizens and businesses as we provide service. In terms of how much data, I would guess that we have easily many hundreds and possibly into the thousands of terabytes in data by now, and it's growing at a higher and higher rate. Every program, every ministry has reams of data as part of all of the business that it does. In terms of state of play, we're realizing more and more how valuable this data is to decision making across government when we manage it effectively, of course. And we're seeing that we need to grapple with cost-effective ways to store that data as it continues to increase. So hopefully looking forward to some of the benefits that the cloud team will provide us in that space.
So no pressure, Jen. It sounds like lots of opportunities around leveraging data for decision making and optimizing storage. Let's hear a little bit about the history. How did we get to where we are now? What's the history of data in the BC government?
Yeah, so like in many things, we can be proud of our leadership and our history of leadership in the data space. As BC, we were the first province to have a spatial data infrastructure. We were the first to have an open data policy in Canada as well. The natural resource sector in particular has been using the spatial data infrastructure and spatial data in general to support operational decision making for decades. And there's groups in social development and health that have been analyzing data to support policymaking and decision-making there for at least as long. So lots of great expertise in government. And we also have a really passionate data community. We have passionate data leaders on BC Data Council and its working groups that have helped to really move the data agenda forward. Originally, that was formed to get data out there as open data. And more recently, the group has broadened its scope to inform data management, talent management, literacy, and technology as it relates to data. I'm sure there's lots of folks on the call that have a lot more history on data in government and BC government than I do. But from what I've heard, in the early days, or earlier days, let's say about 20 years ago, data was managed much more tightly. We had less data at that point. We had maybe one or two kinds of databases, a certain number of standardized fields. And the data at that point was kind of more similar to each other. It was pretty interoperable and more easily shared across systems. And now we have a much greater diversity, even in just our structured data. So at the same time that we have more diversity in data, we're also recognizing that we have complex problems from wildfire to poverty that need to be informed by data from across government. So we need to think of new ways to share and combine that diverse data from diverse places to be able to inform how we make decisions.
Fascinating. It's neat to hear that evolution, sort of, the early investments in spatial data and that growing out into providing opportunities for sort of advanced analytics and whatnot. So Alex, I'll go back to you. We talk about the opportunities of digital government for service delivery and that sort of thing. What role does data play? Why does all this data matter?
Great question, Jamie. So, I would start right with service design. We're all, as you mentioned, it's a big part of the move forward in the digital government space. So how are we and how are teams around government using quantitative and qualitative information to understand what citizens want and how to provide that to them? Like, that's driven by data. Continuous improvement of our services and products. We need performance metrics to see what can be improved and where to focus that investment. Again, driven by data. Digital services. Data is being exchanged between government and citizens. The data needs to flow from one system to another system in order to deliver services robustly, because that data needs to cross program lines. And in that space, let's be honest, those applications that teams build to provide services, they really need data to activate their value. So why does data matter? It just has a huge impact on our service experience that we provide. And if we don't, an example is if we don't have good address data, something that my group is really passionate about, no matter how good we make the digital experience for reporting an accident, an ambulance is probably going to get to the wrong house and not be able to provide that service timely in an emergency situation.
I love that. So data is quite literally saving people's lives. Do you have any other examples to help people sort of see this in a more concrete light?
Sure. Currently, I'm sure many people on this call have registered for mail-in voting. So your addresses, that's data as you enter that, and that uses data services that we in the province provide to help make that a seamless and effective user experience. The COVID chatbot that was stood up in the early days of the pandemic, huge amounts of data are needed to train the AI in chatbots like that. Wildfire was mentioned. So operational effectiveness and informing the public is driven by data and analysis in real time. Things like the softwood lumber issues that our province has faced in the past, data analysis went into winning that dispute. And then another current effort that we see with our partners in the Attorney General is speed limits. So determining optimal speed limits to get to vision zero fatalities and zero injuries. Again, saving people's lives.
Huh, I love that. I love that. Just so often when we go out and we say, "Oh, I work in data," people are like, "Oh, okay, so you manage databases and talk about standards and sort of make all of your family members fall asleep over dinner." But it's like, no, these are very specific and concrete applications that are very clearly improving people's lives. So this work clearly matters a lot. So Jen, given the importance of data, what are some of the things that we're putting in place currently in the BC government to strengthen our data practice? What are the enablers that we're focusing on?
Sure. So I'll go back to the people. I think the people are really the enablers, those that are passionate about data and how to manage it. They're really the engine that drive all of this. And that goes all the way from DAC, the Data Architects Advisory Council, to Data Council, to the Deputy Minister Board on Integrated Data. There's a lot of people working together to move this forward. One of the strategies that I'm most passionate about is around accountabilities for data. This goes back previous to, but kind of came to light a lot in the open data days when we were starting to publish open data. It's not always clear who's accountable for a certain data set. And we have worked over the past couple of years, we've worked with the PSA to develop some accountabilities that really make it clear of what the accountabilities are towards management of data. And that is now available on the job store, so you can add it to your job profile. If you are accountable for a specific data set, that can be codified in your job profile. The next person that has that role will know that they are accountable for that data set, and they can access some tools to help them understand what they need to do to manage that data appropriately. Data literacy has also moved forward quite a bit. There's been some great work done there over the years, over the past couple of years with the Data Council and the working groups. We've created a data literacy curriculum with some great material, including self-assessments, a guide to data for better decisions, a guide to data commons. The group on the policy group in government is working on the data management policy, which is really exciting for the data community to see that come to fruition. And we've also made some great progress on data standards and guides. The gender and sex data standard has been approved, and there's a guide that's in progress and should be available soon to help people apply that standard. There's also data registers, which is a really exciting concept, which will help us all work from a single authoritative data set and connect our applications to that single authoritative data set. Just make sure that we're all using accurate, up-to-date, verifiable data and not capturing the same data multiple times with different bits of incorrectness each time we collect it. So it's a really great way to make sure that we're improving the quality of our data.
That's fantastic. So there's a question that's come up in Slido that I'd like to ask you, Jen. Dave is asking for a little bit more detail on cloud. So can you give us a bit of a sense of the kinds of tech that we're looking at so that we can get ministries up to speed, and what's the relevance of that tech for data?
Sure. So for cloud, we're actually starting with cloud compute and storage. There's lots of different sort of levels of cloud, but we're starting with cloud compute and storage because it is kind of the foundation. So our tactic is to partner with the federal government, who's done a lot of heavy lifting in terms of negotiating with cloud vendors and setting up a lot of security compliance as well. So we're leveraging from the work that they've done, and we're looking to have an MVP, aiming for late November to have that MVP available. So we'll have a fully compliant cloud compute and storage landing zone that early adopters can start building or placing applications on. Cloud storage as well is for data is something that another group in government in ES is looking at doing a pilot with the NRM to understand how a Azure file storage can help with some of the file storage and costing and the process and how that can work in cloud as well.
Very exciting. Okay, so now I want to sort of pick on some of the risks associated with this work. So within the digital principles, we've got our second principle that talks about designing with people and embedding inclusion. How can data and analytics support some of the goals that we've established as a government for inclusion? And are there any risks in failing to do that? Are there risks that maybe that are presented for our communities when it comes to inclusion?
Yeah, so I think that kind of to start with, if we think about humans and individuals, and we don't fit into neat little boxes of structured data. Data standards might seem like an attempt to fit us into little boxes because of just that word standards sounds that way, but it can actually help us to be more inclusive by providing more options and providing options that are defined by community members themselves. So the gender and sex data standard is a great example of how a standard can help us be more inclusive. And it's also a great example of the passion of the public service. More than 50 public servants worked on developing that standard. And it was based on best practices that were themselves informed by a larger community. Analytics as well can help us think about and understand the impacts of policies and programs and events on different communities and groups. I know that we're all using and familiar with GBA Plus now as we develop policies and programs, and that's a way to think about the impacts of our work on communities. I think that it's also important to recognize that the data has in the past had negative impacts on communities, or the use of data has. And that's a real risk that we need to recognize when we collect data, when we manage it, when we analyze it, and when we report out on it. And there's a few things we can do to help mitigate that risk, in addition to just kind of being mindful when we do all of those things. And that's... Sorry, looks like I cut out there for a second. So some of the ways to mitigate that risk include involving the community in your activities, and also considering both qualitative and quantitative data. Numbers by themselves are unlikely to give you that full context that you would get from talking to people with lived experience. There was a really great privacy community of practice that I attended, I think it was last week, that had really in-depth discussion about these points, and it was really great to attend that, and I think there'll be more discussions like that in the future, and these are the discussions we should keep having.
That's fantastic. Alex, last word to you. Where are we going? What's the path forward on data?
You know, I would look to a great example coming from our friends at the federal government, and use an example of tell me once. So wouldn't it be great if we could do for ourselves what we've done for our businesses through the org book? So enable our citizens, enable us as employees to inform one place where we're updating our information. So where data is about us is accurate and up to date and verified, and we don't have to type it into autocomplete over and over and over again that we all have to do. So path forward there is services card and registries teams. Another big area, citizens access control over their own data. So health gateways is in place. Citizens can now see their own prescriptions. And just imagine if we could see all of our interactions with government in the same way. Health's doing it already, we all can eventually. And then another big area would be secure APIs, which is enabling all of these things to happen. So getting to a place where data can safely flow across all of our organizational boundaries. So it's happening to some extent, and more will continue.
That's fantastic. Thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your experiences. I know I certainly learned a lot, and I hope that others on the call also did. We're at time, so thank you all very much for joining us for this month's update on digital government. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation about data, and I'll look forward to reconnecting with you all in November. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.